Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good day, I guess. My name is Ben Lee. I'm here running LoopUp Live Talking Teams, and today we are going to be covering deploying Microsoft Teams calling internationally. And I'm joined by not one, but two colleagues this time. So, Graham, I'll let you go first. Do you want to just introduce yourself and say hello, please?
Hi there. So yeah, this is my second session with you, so thanks for having me back. My name is Graham Cropley. I'm the Global Head of Consulting over here at LoopUp.
Good stuff. And I'm also joined by Steve McGeary. Steve, do you want to just fill us in on what it is you do, and maybe it'll become clear why we've got you along today?
Yeah, so Steve McGeary, as you said, SVP of Telecommunications Strategy. So I look after all of LoopUp's telecom relationships, and I'm tasked with getting us registered from a regulatory point of view in all the countries we want to operate in.
Okay, so there's a big word in there around regulation, but we'll come back to that in a minute or two. So I guess a little bit of scene setting, I suppose, that when we're talking about deploying Teams calling specifically internationally, that there's a lot of organizations that are looking towards Teams as a unified platform for their communication and collaboration workloads. And Graham, what would you see as being kind of the key benefit of standardizing on a common platform like Teams as the core platform for your telephony?
Just there's a couple of points to it, really. There's generally more advantages with consolidation than there is having like a fear of having all your eggs in one basket. So I know a few customers who spoke to recently want multiple solutions to cover kind of telephony or meetings or something else. It really comes from not to try and speak ill of them, but it comes from an understanding really of what the management overhead and the effective user adoption has on having multiple solutions to cover that. So whether you're saying multiple solutions for the same modality like calling, or whether you're talking about a separate solution for meetings, a different one for chat, and a different one for telephony. So I think that consolidation overall really shouldn't underestimate how much overhead there is from having multiple solutions. Also, Teams is very, very broad. So from the other side of the coin, if you're talking about your broad communications and collaboration, really having those things in one place, to split one part of it out creates friction. So we're seeing lots and lots of customers that are using Teams, are using it for chat, they're using it for meetings, all the internal calls and the work they do, even like the co-authoring side of things as well, but then have to use something completely different for telephone call or to receive calls. So you don't have that natural workflow of dragging in colleagues or escalating to a meeting or all those sorts of things. So
that's
got a benefits to be had.
Kind of consolidation of the platform, and that's a case for having telephony as part of that platform that you're doing for other things. Do you think there's also a benefit to consolidating the underlying supply of telecoms? I mean, one of the trends that we've seen or that I've seen quite a lot in the past is around companies that would do consolidation exercises where they'd end up with maybe a centralized phone system running out of North America and out of Europe and other parts of the world. Do you think there's much of a benefit of kind of pulling those elements together as well?
Yeah, there really is, and it's often overlooked as well. So maybe slightly backwards, but even after the fact, having to deal with all those different carriers management platforms and understand the separate bills from different locations into different parts of your business, like the consolidated reports you might have, you don't have it when you've got multiple carriers under the hood. There's also then like the overhead of understanding which carrier has which particular ticket process to raise a problem or a new number request and how to deal with them and what language you have to talk to them in if they're a certain local carrier in a certain country. I think it's very often overlooked that if you're looking at deploying direct routing, you look at the technology side, you look at the SBCs, you put them in and manage them, but that doesn't get rid of the issue you have with dealing with those multiple carriers. And then to go back to the start of it, if you're looking to find a carrier, you've got to do all your market analysis and trying to find some sort of confidence in a company that you've never heard of before, perhaps to try and find a new carrier in a local region. And then you don't have the volumes to negotiate a decent rate with those people as well. So there's the technical difficulties of once that's all deployed and how they do SIP in their particular flavor in that country, or whether they only have ISDN or some random CAS-R2 or DAS2, all those DPNSS old technologies that may still
Hey, this isn't technology bingo, not today.
Right. I know acronyms. I can do acronyms all day.
So I guess Steve, maybe to pull you in at this point, then why is it so hard to get global coverage from a single provider or from a few providers? If you look at Microsoft and what they offer with calling plans, with their weight and size and heft, they have coverage in 33 or so countries. Like why is it something that's difficult to why can't we just go to a BT, for example, and have service wherever we want it.
Yeah, I mean, it's historic, really. Telcos tended to develop in regions, or at best in a country. Deploying cables underground to deliver telephone calls. So even when they went to expand, they tended to expand in region to adjacent countries or other countries that they traded with. So you mentioned BT. I think BT Global Services only cover something like 28 countries. So even if you went to BT Global Services, you wouldn't get that global coverage that we already have. It is difficult, and the carriers are aware of this, but there's nobody that has gone. I think BT are probably the biggest in terms of reach in that 28 countries, being able to offer a full PSTN type replacement service.
And I guess, we probably haven't specified, but to be clear, that's what you do for us, isn't it? Is help, ultimately to our customers. We're an aggregator, or customers and partners are an aggregator of all those different carriers to provide service by, if you want, kind of filling in the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, aren't we, to get the whole picture? And that's where you come in for us. So
no, absolutely. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So I was going to say, what is the process that you have to go through of providing telecom services in different countries? It seems like the whole kind of industry is tightening up a little bit. That it used to be that things like number presentation, being able to spoof numbers, all that sort of stuff is getting restricted. Why is it so hard to be able to do these services now?
Yeah, so I mean, to offer a service, you need to have. And I say a license, it's not always a license. You might have to notify a regulator that you're operating in a country. Sometimes it is a license, but there's always some hoop to jump through before you can legitimately operate within any given country. And that might be something, simple form, and most of Europe operates within this telecoms framework. So in most of Europe, it's a relatively similar process. In some countries, you have to notify the police. In other countries, you've got to go to a government department and to the regulator, because generally the regulators sit outside. But as you said, regulation seems to be getting stricter. And I think part of that is the scammers are getting smarter. So regulation gets tightened to really protect the consumer, somewhat to protect internal revenues for in-country telcos as well, because you sort of bypassing international call rates by delivering calls locally and things like that. But generally, regulation's getting tighter, so it's harder to get numbers, to do number portability.
And is that where kind of part of it is things like making sure that even if we've got permission to be a carrier in a particular country or work with a carrier in a particular country, there's rules in place around number provision and making sure that there's addresses bound to the numbers, and that there's people who live and work in those locations and all that sort of thing.
And it is, again, the rules are there to protect the consumer and the businesses. So you've got to have a legitimate address for a given number in a particular country. They don't want numbers being provided to companies that are in different locations, maybe outside the country, and using that number to appear to be local, to people see a local number and they have confidence that that's somebody phoning from their city,
from where they say
actually it's a call center from wherever. So that's becoming more common. There are more and more countries that need, and they want evidence, and sometimes it's copies of passports or ID of a person to link that number to.
So we mentioned a few minutes ago that word regulation. Like, do you have to be regulated to provide telecom services, or does it vary around the world from country to country?
It's pretty much, well, not pretty much, everywhere you need to have some sort of regulation or notification or something official through a regulator or police.
And are you able to provide services? Like, what if you have services from a provider who is, not quite compliant with those things? What's the risk there?
Yeah, so there are, we are aware companies providing services without being regulated, which isn't great for them. It isn't great for the customers. So if the regulator finds out, the nice bit is they just stop the service. They pull the numbers and those numbers go dead. The more negative for those providers is that there can be fines, and significant fines. Fines vary country by country. But it isn't a good situation. You wouldn't want to go to your customers and go, "I'm really sorry, we're not actually regulated, so tomorrow the service is being turned off." That's a terrible way to do business. So we've taken the correct approach and gone and got regulated in all the countries we want to offer.
So what would be kind of your top 3 most challenging locations? You said Europe, things are fairly similar from one location to another because there's kind of a common framework and things work together. What what would be your top 3 nightmare or difficult, challenging locations?
I was going to say that there are lots of challenging locations, and you've got countries where it's nigh on impossible. But places like popular places where lots of organizations want to do business, like China, India, and Russia, are challenging. In a lot of these places, you've got to set up a company within the country to apply for the license. In India, we've got to partner with an Indian company. In Russia, we have to have a local director, so somebody in Russia as a director of that Russian business to be able to apply for the license. So it is difficult. We're well underway and have lots of these things in place, but it is very challenging.
So it sounds very much like it's not kind of technical requirements per se. It's softer side of things.
Yeah, I think there are some technical. A lot of countries want calls to terminate in country, so obviously we need data centers in country and equipment to terminate those calls to connect into our service. But yeah, there are the softer things where regulators and governments don't want to see all that revenue disappearing to international businesses. They want to try and keep that within country. Yeah.
And I guess you mentioned there about data centers and call breakout. That traditionally is kind of one of the known things in a country like India, where you have to have the calls breaking out in country. But it sounds like that's not even just that you have to have a point of presence in the country. You have to have a point of presence in the regions as required. Is that correct?
No, so in India you have to terminate calls within the region. So we're scheduling our rollout based on demand. So the highest demand regions we're going to first, and then we have a schedule based on the current pipeline of where we need to be. We have a good process for deploying data centers, so we're getting quite slick at it, and we can do it pretty quick.
So, are there any parts of the world that it's impractical to go through that process, for various reasons? Is that something that happens?
No, absolutely. So some countries where, there might be a dictatorship, or the telephone infrastructure is owned by a government that is very closed and secretive, so North Korea, other places where it's cost that is prohibitive, and you would need to have a significant business to go and get licensed there. Places like UAE, places that are really expensive to actually go and get that license. So some places like that, we offer a local SBC as a solution. So the customer keeps their relationship with their existing carrier. We deploy some equipment to put those calls into that team's environment.
I was going to leave Graham in there and say, well, that scuppers our common platform, but you've beaten us to the punchline there. Graham, is there anything to elaborate on that local SBC solution? That sounds like that could be quite complicated, or not too bad.
Yeah, it can be very simple. Obviously, there's a requirements from the carrier to take into account, as in how do they want to connect? Can it be SIP or is it physical? But beyond that, you can actually, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you can mix all these different various ways of getting telephony into teams within the same tenant. So you could have some users with calling plans and some with a partner-hosted direct routing, some with a self-managed direct routing. Even if you go with local carriers or some sort of cloud provider, you're probably still left with this sort of regional blocks of maybe some aggregators around, and then you get that mismanagement between the different platforms. But to bring it back to the point of why we're talking about it, really is with our solution with LoopUp, we do have all the cloud platform and the unified management interface, but also when we deploy and manage and support these SBCs in the countries where we don't have telephony in the cloud, we can still put those numbers into our admin portal so they're managed and reported and assigned to users in the same way through our system.
And it's so basically you can still sit on top of that common Teams platform depending on where you go. So Steve, it sounds like your day job, if I massively oversimplify, is very straightforward, right? You decide that we need to have coverage in a particular country. You go, look up on the internet what you need to do. You fill in the forms, and jobs are good. And is that right, or is it a little bit more complex than that?
It's honestly, it's that simple. Yeah, completely. So I speak 20 languages, and so it's super complicated because it's different in almost every country. Language is obviously an issue as well, dealing with the various carriers and regulators, and some, understandably insist on being dealt with in their own language. But I don't know, managing carriers is a bit of a dark art. If you haven't had a carrier as a supplier before, they're a very interesting beast. From billing is particularly difficult, and if you think that there are billions of minutes, millions of calls going through, so trying to keep track, trying to keep these things accurate. But when we're getting on for 20 carriers now, and that's it's challenging, and billing. So recently, I came across a big discrepancy in billing at a previous company, not with LoopUp, which meant the carrier owed us over £500,000. So
wow.
that hadn't been.
So they'd just been sending the bill, and you just trusted and you pay it, and it's
And we did. We checked. We did rudimentary checks to sort of to make sure it was in line with what we thought. But when you do that deep dive and deep diving into billions of minutes and millions of calls, it is challenging as well. And that was a company where we had 3 carriers. We've now got 20. It's a big job.
So if you go through that process, you get a carrier on board, you deal with whatever infrastructure is required to support that, the ABCs, the setup, etc., etc. Is it functionally the same? Do you get the same service from the different carriers? You can make and receive calls. Can you always port numbers? Do what are some of those restrictions and things you get there? And how do you handle that?
No, so those are part of when we set up a new carrier relationship. We ask them what they can do, and then we get some numbers and we test it, because it's not it doesn't always line up what they say and what they can actually do.
So it's not just being able to make a call for testing; it's making sure the number looks like it should and presents in the right way, and all that sort of stuff as well, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, and can you call emergency services? Does that call get connected in the right location? Can you call toll-free numbers? Do we get local CLI type presentation? We need to check all of those things, so we can confidently give those numbers to our customers and provide the service of a quality that we want. So it's not straightforward at all.
No, okay. So I guess kind of coming back to the point of what we were talking about, deploying Microsoft Teams calling internationally, we've kind of, it sounds like there are several choices about how you can go about that. Option 1 is maybe you would look at deploying your own direct routing solution or calling plans depending on your coverage. But if you're doing your own direct routing solution, you still need to have, and maintain those relationships, all those technical ins and outs, having a carrier and all the kinds of multiple bills. What, Graham, any views on that, or what an alternative might be?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I was looking at the chat and trying to answer some of those as well. Alternative to...
Yeah, so just saying that, a company can do their own direct routing deployment and still have to maintain and manage the carriers, or what else might they be able to do?
That's actually one of the questions I was trying to answer in the chat. Yeah, so direct routing is a fantastic way of just using any carrier that you currently have or want to have to bring telephony into Teams. So using Teams as a phone system, you still need a way to have that call break out to the rest of the world, to the PSTN network. So direct routing is a great way to do that. The options within it is either to deploy your own SBCs, so either on premises or virtual hosted or whatever the carrier can connect to. But then there's also the overhead of managing and maintaining that SBC, patching it, certificates, all the things you have to do to manage that, and also from a troubleshooting point of view. So we obviously finding a lot of customers that see more advantageous reasons to go with a partner to host. And again, a level up from that is to have a global proper full cloud SaaS solution to host it with, rather than just to pay someone else to host an SBC for you specifically. So there's quite a few different nuances in there, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, no, I think so. Thank you. And I guess it's that, it's not a case of Teams can or can't do it. Teams can do it. It's how you glue all those pieces in underneath to support what you want to do. So it's do it yourself, or it's go with partners, or it's go with a partner who has all of that coverage across all the different countries. So okay. Good stuff. I think that kind of draws us to the end of what we're looking to cover today. So thank you very much for that. I think in terms of Talking Teams, the next event we'll be doing on October the 28th. We're going to be looking at driving change, how to have a successful Teams call out. Successful Microsoft Teams calling rollout. So that's going to be with someone from our project management office, looking at the shape and flow of a project, how things might get deployed, what some of the stumbling points might be, what sort of prep people can put in beforehand. So thank you very much for that. And as always, kind of questions, comments on the LinkedIn page, and we'll get to them. Thank you.